before you start the meeting, the second step is to set up guidelines for communication. How are we going to communicate together during this resolution meeting? And I've got examples in the worksheets that you can look at. And there's also an article called Why I Hate Meetings. You'll see that link there. And Code of Conduct guidelines for all meetings are crucial. I believe that's why I used to hate meetings, or when I can't run the meeting and set up guidelines, I hate the meetings, because they usually run off track unless we have a framework to guide us that we all agree to. So to have an effective conflict resolution meeting, we're going to do some pre-meeting preparation. It doesn't have to take long, but we want some preparation. We're going to agree to some communication guidelines, and then we're going to follow a 6-step process. You'll see this in the worksheets, but it is basically you're going to assign the two people 2 roles. One is a talker and one is a listener. They'll switch roles after they go through the process once. The talker, guess what the talker's going to do? I know I'm being silly. Talk. The talker is going to look at the situations that they thought about prior to the meeting that bothered them the most with this individual, and they're going to pick the one that they want to talk about. And the talker is going to share uninterrupted, while the listener, the other person, is going to, you guessed it, listen. Listen to the talker share. And all the listener can do during this time of the meeting is to understand or seek to understand. So they can ask questions about what they don't understand, but no explanations, no defensiveness. The only job of the listener right now in this part of the meeting is to listen, to understand. Okay? That's because the second step for the listener's going to restate to the talker, here's what I heard you say. And then the third step is the talker is going to share, that's correct, this is incorrect, here's what I really meant. So this is the time of clarification. And what happens during this part of the meeting is resistance, say it's really, really high and they're both really tense. When the talker gets to talk and the listener starts hearing without trying to start a debate but has to listen to understand, the tension starts to dissipate. And eventually a lot of the tension will blow through. They might not leave the meeting best of friends, but more understanding will result and resistance will come down tremendously. So don't ever underestimate the role of listening. And there's an article about listening. I think the title of it under the video is Reducing Resistance, Listening Aggressively. And you'll see all of that information there and check that out. So once the talkers talk, the listener has listened and shared. They've agreed that they understand each other, at least the facts of the situation. They can now, with being less tense and being on the same page about the situation, start talking about facts and solutions. And then the last step in this 6-step process for the meeting is to agree on what are we going to do now? Where do we go from here? And when are we going to follow up around this, what we just agreed to? And then what happens is the two participants switch roles. So the listener becomes the talker and the talker becomes the listener, and you go through it again. It really, really works. I don't love conflict. I'm one of those who can sometimes be too easy or too harsh or can ignore. I've done all 3. And so I've facilitated meetings using this process, and it really works. And I've also used it myself. So I suggest to you to try it. Follow the steps. Like anything, it feels a little mechanical as I describe it, so explicitly here. But anytime you break something down, it's specific like that. When you're actually doing it, it flows very naturally. So in closing, I want to share the recap what we just talked about. There are 3 keys to defeating communication anxiety and resolving conflict. The first is to take personal responsibility. The second is to know your communication style and manage it. The third is to use a conflict resolution process. And the process that I like the most is one that involves a pre-meeting worksheet, agreement of guidelines, and then following that 6-step process. Conflict is inevitable. Combat is optional. That's a Max Lucchese quote. I wish I had said it, but I didn't. Conflict is inevitable. We're going to have conflict. But fighting, going to combat and war when we're in conflict is optional. And using this process will help you move through conflict. It'll help you defeat any communication anxiety you might have around conflict. And I'd like to hear more about your experiences. There's a comment box below about questions that you might have, experiences, resources that you might suggest. I'd love for you to share those. Thanks for being part of the Wake Up Eager community. This is Susie Price, signing off.